Since we're now into December and we're 75% of the way through the 2022 NFL season, I thought it would be a good time to dive into Dynasty running back rankings, and not just my rankings or DLF's rankings or ADP. No, I wanted to do something a little different, a little more objective. So what I did was I took every running back in the league right now. I calculated their fantasy points per game this season, took their current age and their current DLF ADP, mashed all that together into one number and ranked Dynasty running backs that way. But if you watched my video on wide receivers, you noticed that I changed how far back I'm looking at scoring, as receivers were back to the start of 2021 and running backs are just this 2022 season. The reason I did that was because of the extremely short shelf life for running backs in Dynasty, and the position overall being treated more like a redraft than looking 3 to 5 years into the future. So what I hope this would do is remove a lot of the subjectivity of rankings with personal biases towards players, age, production, and just boil down rankings into the three most important aspects of Dynasty: age, production, and value. So let's dive in. Coming in at number 12 is the always reliable Nick Chubb, but this is a 3-spot drop from his November ADP. Now, I know a lot of you out there are probably like, Nick Chubb, the current RB6, averaging 18 PPR points per game, ranked at RB12. And yeah, looking at this list, it's hard to explain why Chubb is all the way down here and other guys around his same age and producing the same are ranked higher, but that's just how these numbers panned out. Although when looking at the final scores, Chubb is the last in what is a long, I'll call, second tier of running backs that goes from RB4 down to RB12. So really, it's like Chubb is just the least preferred of this entire group of 9 players. But let's discuss why that might be. Number 1 is age, as he turns 27 at the end of December, which in running back years is like 60 years old. And we know that basically when a running back turns 25 or 26, that the best they can do is just hold value with their production, which Chubb is doing right now. But that's all you can do as a running back in Dynasty once you hit a certain age point. And then number 2, we just have more longevity questions. With Deshaun Watson coming into this offense, do the Browns become more pass focused and take away from Chubb in the running game? I mean, it makes sense. You don't just trade away your entire future Sonny Weaver style for an elite quarterback just to make him the next Ryan Tannehill. We also know that Chubb isn't heavily utilized in the passing game, so like 90% of his fantasy production comes from him just being an excellent runner with great volume. But you take a little bit of that volume away, and then all of a sudden, his fantasy production starts to go as well. I mean, just look at Dalvin Cook, who's currently seeing the lowest numbers of rush attempts per game since 2018, and that's at age 27, which is how old Chubb will be next year. And because of the drop in volume, Cook's fantasy numbers have dropped as well. I mean, he's still really good. He's a fantasy RB1 this year, but that difference between where Chubb is now at RB6 and where Cook is at RB11 is a drop that's really hard to recover from in Dynasty when you're 27 years old, soon to be 28. Let's move on to RB11, the 2022 hotness of Rhamondre Stevenson, who I was surprised to learn is about to turn 25 in February. So the more you know. But there's a lot to talk about with Rhamondre Stevenson, because on one hand, he has absolutely surpassed Dameon Pierce as the Patriots RB1, not just because Harris has been injured a lot recently, but even before the injury, Stevenson was getting 15 plus touches a game, including the most valuable asset of his game for fantasy, the receiving game. On the season, Stevenson is 4th among all running backs in total targets with 68, but since week 7, he is 2nd among running backs in targets with 47, averaging nearly 8 targets per game. That volume of targets is the reason he's the RB7 in that stretch, finishing inside the top 17 every single week and inside the top 10 in 4 of those 6 games. And that's with only scoring 2 total touchdowns. Any running back who has 7+ targets per game in their skill set is already a high-end RB2, and any efficiency on the ground or in scoring is what's going to lift them into top 5, even top 3 overall ceilings. That is what Rhamondre Stevenson can be. But on the flip side, he's a Patriots running back, which Bill Belichick has made it almost a point to never let us be able to trust a back in his offense for an extended period of time. Sure, Dameon Pierce is a free agent in the spring, and he's honestly likely gone, but they could just replace him in free agency or the draft and give Stevenson a legit competition number 2 running back. Remember, Stevenson is also a day 3 pick, and while Belichick may be one of the few coaches in the NFL who doesn't really care about that, it still needs to be mentioned because as a whole, the NFL has shown us just how easy it is for those players to be replaced and then never heard from again. I don't know, to me, Stevenson just feels like an unnecessary risk that if you're willing to pay up for a running back in his range, just go to Nick Chubb instead with much more dependency, or depending on how dangerous you're feeling, you could go to our RB10 DeAndre Swift, because man, I just cannot give this man up. He is just so talented, and this past Sunday just sucked me right back in. 14 carries, 4 receptions, over 100 total yards and a touchdown, 21 PPR points. That is what DeAndre Swift can be every single week. But I get the frustration because all offseason Swift was valued comfortably inside the top 5, if not top 3 for Dynasty. And so if a lot of you out there bought in on those prices, you're not happy and you're kicking yourself for not stopping at the warning track. But I think RB10 is a really good price. I think it's a good balance of his talent and weekly upside with his age, but then also his inability to stay healthy, plus the couple of kind of dud games he gives you coming back from injury. But for me, I mean, come on, I can't give the man up. He's on my wall. Moving on to our RB9, it's Austin Ekeler, the RB2 last year, the current RB1 this year. Austin Ekeler is just, he's amazing. He's averaging 22.5 points per game already, over 1,100 total yards, 12 total touchdowns. He's on pace to break Christian McCaffrey's record for receptions in a single season. He's fantastic. He's absolutely amazing. The only issue for Dynasty is age, as he's going to be 28 next year, and no matter how great he is for fantasy, we're going to be expecting a decline every year until he actually starts declining and then retires, and that would drive his value down. Now, he might be wrong. It's kind of like how we've been saying this is the year for the past like 2 years now for Derrick Henry, and yet he's still crushing it. So the same can be true for Austin Ekeler, but that's just the name of the game for aging running backs right now, especially once they cross 27 or 28 years old. Let's move on to RB8. It's Travis Etienne, and this one might raise some eyebrows given his recent production, but remember, I'm weighing out his total 2022 season, which is only averaging 13 points per game right now. Now, if I plug in his 16 points per game average without James Robinson, he does rise all the way to RB3, so there is that. I think Etienne is fantastic. I was completely in on him all summer as a breakout running back, and he's shown all the reasons why I loved him now that he is the RB1 in Jacksonville. To me, this one's pretty simple. He's relatively young at 24 years old, but still has 2 more years on his rookie deal, plus a 5th-year option if they wanted to pick that up. So situationally, he's really, really great. Production, obviously great as long as Peterson doesn't get in the way and get a new James Robinson coming in here. But there's still one piece of Etienne's game that the Jaguars just aren't utilizing right now: his receiving ability. Through 12 games, he only has 34 targets, averaging 2 receptions per game. That is really frustrating considering that he averaged 4 receptions per game in his final year at Clemson with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. Etienne should be getting targets at an Aaron Jones or an Alvin Kamara level pace. He should not be getting the same number of targets per game as Samaje freaking Perine. So as good as Etienne has been for fantasy recently, add on about 2 or 3 more receptions per game, and we're talking about an easy top 5 fantasy running back, especially as the Jaguars, just as a team, gets better and give Etienne more scoring opportunities and shootout games. That's where Etienne can really thrive for us in fantasy and Dynasty. Up next is the first of 2 really interesting ranking placements. Dynasty RB7, Josh Jacobs. Interesting, right? I mean, again, this is as objective of rankings as you can get when you combine age, production, and current consensus value. The numbers spit out Josh Jacobs at RB7. He is the fantasy RB2 right now, averaging 22 PPR points per game. He's already over 1,300 rushing yards, another 300 receiving, 10 total touchdowns. Now, his 50 bomb 2 weeks ago certainly helped push him to RB3, but he also has 5 top 3 performances on the season, which is more than anybody not named Austin Ekeler. But it's that elite production that's really propping him up in these rankings, because if he was averaging 19 points per game instead of 22, he would be the Dynasty RB10. 18 points per game, he's the RB12. 15 points per game, RB14. That's how much his production right now is boosting him up here in these rankings, because look at the rest of his profile. He's about to be 25 years old, which is the first year we start to say, you know, he's getting up there in age for a running back. His 5th-year option was declined, so he's a free agent in 2023. Is he back on the Raiders, or is he with somebody else? If it's with somebody else, do they give him the same volume that he's getting now? There are so many unknowns with Josh Jacobs that it makes him hard to value in Dynasty, especially if he's not back in Las Vegas. Before we get into the top 5, let's touch on RB6 real quick, because it's Christian McCaffrey. I mean, we know what we're getting here. Dude is great when he's on the field. Carolina, San Francisco, it doesn't matter. It's Christian McCaffrey. I will say it was weird to see him in a committee with Elijah Mitchell for a couple weeks, but Mitchell is on IR again, so this backfield is just entirely Christian McCaffrey's. He's going to be great. He will be 27 next season, so there is that, but he's another Austin Ekeler type, where as long as he's healthy and he's playing, you have a top 5 running back, and we'll deal with his decline when we get to that point. All right, top 5 now, and I mentioned with Josh Jacobs that there were 2 interesting placements on this list. One of them was Jacobs, and the other was right here at RB5. It's Dameon Pierce, and I just really can't get on board with this one. If you follow this channel at all since draft season, you know my opinion of Dameon Pierce. If not, watch this video right up here for more in-depth explanation. But basically, he's not a good prospect profile. He was a day 3 pick. It's not like he's killing it for fantasy either. He's only averaging 13 points per game as the RB16. He literally has 9 more fantasy points on the season than Najee Harris, and everybody hates Najee Harris. What's propping him up here to RB5 is his current DLF ADP at RB10, which I think is a little high, and then age, since he's still only 21, turning 22 in February. In fact, he's actually the 4th youngest back in my top 36. So that's really helping him out here, is the fact that he's so much younger than everybody else. But I just can't get on board with this one at all. I mean, maybe if he wasn't a day 3 pick, or maybe if he was producing a little bit better, then fine. But no, I can't get on board with Dameon Pierce as a top 5 dynasty running back. I'm sorry, just no. Let's move on to RB4, somebody I am much more excited to talk about, and that's Saquon Barkley. I mean, I just love seeing Saquon Barkley ranked inside the top 5. DLF ADP actually has him inside the top 3, which is even better to see. Fantasy football is just, it's so much better when Saquon is healthy and producing like a stud. I mean, is it not? He's averaging 18 points per game, the current RB5, but he's right there in a tier with Christian McCaffrey, Nick Chubb, and Derrick Henry, all basically producing the same amount of points. On the field, there's really nothing more that needs to be said about Saquon Barkley and about his production. Off the field, there are a couple of questions still, age and contract. Age is not really a major issue. He's turning 26 in February, so there's still a year or two before we're like extremely concerned about it. The contract is a little scarier only because we don't know what the Giants want to do. Do they want to give Saquon a massive contract as they continue building out this team, or do they opt to let him walk and just hit reset on a new and cheaper rookie running back? This isn't the regime that drafted Barkley 2nd overall, so they're not tied to him like that. Of course, he's still Saquon Barkley, so no matter where he goes, he'll be elite, I'm sure, just like Christian McCaffrey switched teams, and he's still elite, but there's still like that 5 to 10% chance that he's not, so it is worth mentioning, especially if you're investing in him now as a top 5 dynasty running back. Let's get into our top 3 now, and I mean, y'all know who these top 3 are, and they're all in the same tier because they're all amazing, but everybody wants to know what is the exact order of this top 3. So starting at RB3, we have Jonathan Taylor, and this is not a knock on Taylor. He is fantastic, and he's reminded us of that in recent weeks after a slower start to the season, as this Colts team is just, it's awful. But Taylor is still great. He has 3 RB1 performances in the last 4 weeks and was RB18 just this past week, as it seems like his little injury bout is behind him. In that stretch of 4 games, he's averaging 100 rushing yards per game, a touchdown in 3 of those 4 games, and a solid floor of like 3-ish receptions per game for an added boost in PPR leagues. This is the Jonathan Taylor that we know and love, and the Jonathan Taylor at his best. So what is it that pushes him down to RB3 here? Well, I mean, simply put, it's age, which is crazy to say for a 23, soon to be 24-year-old running back, but that's the truth. In Dynasty, when players have similar production and situations, most people will just take the younger guy, and that's basically what's happening here. If any of y'all have him as RB1 or RB2, that's fine. I said at the beginning of this that the top 3 are all in one tier, so they're all basically the same to me. It's just that this method prefers the other 2 because they're a year or 2 younger. So speaking of the other 2, let's go to RB2, which is Kenneth Walker, who is also absolutely fantastic. I think you can honestly make the argument that where we are with Walker right now is where we were with Jonathan Taylor at the end of his rookie season. We all remember what Jonathan Taylor did in his 2nd year. That is the ceiling for Kenneth Walker. Before getting hurt this past week, he was averaging 14.5 points per game, and that's with 3 straight games outside the top 40 to start the year as Rashad Penny's backup. But since taking over in week 5 through last week, he was the RB8, averaging 19 points per game, and everything is a go for Kenneth Walker moving forward. He's 22 years old. He's got 3 years left on his contract after this season. His situation's great. Seattle was an absolutely amazing spot for him. Rashad Penny doesn't matter. He's irrelevant. He's either gone in free agency or he's re-signed to be strictly the backup to Kenneth Walker. This could not have been scripted any better for Walker's rookie season and dynasty value. And honestly, to a lot of you out there, you probably have him as your dynasty RB1, but he just falls a little short of the actual RB1, and that's Bijan Robinson. I'm just kidding. Not really. No, I am kidding. No, I'm not. But okay, the actual dynasty RB1 right now is still Breece Hall. And I know he tore his ACL. That could affect his play in 2023, but I'm not really concerned about that. We have seen plenty of running backs return from ACL injuries and still be elite. Dalvin Cook is actually a fantastic example of this, who also tore his ACL early into his rookie season and then returned to be the Dalvin Cook that we all know and love. To me, it's not that hard here. Breece Hall was the RB1 over Kenneth Walker all year as a rookie. Then he immediately comes in and from the start has 7 straight top 24 performances, including 2 top 6 weeks. In the game he got hurt in and didn't even play half of it, he still finished as the RB22 on the week. He is the reason the Jets went 5-2 to start the year. He is the reason Zach Wilson played as many games as he did and wasn't benched sooner. Oh, and still just 21 and a half years old. He doesn't turn 22 until after the NFL draft in May. He'll basically be the same age as like 80% of the running backs coming in as rookies. You should be buying Breece Hall at any discount that is given to you. He is elite. He is the Dynasty RB1. Well, until May, because then that's Bijan Robinson. And you should not be concerned about the ACL because Breece Hall is going to be fantastic for the rest of his career. And then just in case anybody was interested, here's the entire top 24 running backs using this method of ranking. I'm not going to run through any of the RB2s, but definitely drop a comment down below if you see anything interesting one way or another. And just in case you missed it, I did this same approach for the wide receiver position as well, so you can check out my top 12 Dynasty wide receivers in this video right up here.